So it's 3 in the morning. I'm standing in the hallway outside my little daughter's room, barefoot on the cold wood floors, and I'm counting. One knock, then a pause, followed by a silence you can feel from the other side of the door. Then 2 knocks, another pause, then one more, and then nothing. That thick kind of nothing, like the whole house is holding its breath. I've been out here maybe 4 minutes now. I keep telling myself I haven't gone in because I don't want to wake her. That's not really it. The truth is, I finally figured out what's been bothering me about that sound, and I really don't like it. It's too even, too patient. That's not a kid messing around with a wall. That's a kid waiting for an answer she already knows is coming, and then it comes. Now let me back up and tell you how we got here. Start from the beginning. We bought the house in March. I want to be honest about why. The price looked like a misprint. Upstate New York, Wayne County, a township so small it barely registers on a road atlas. The listing had been sitting for nearly a year. 4 bedrooms, a full cellar, 2 acres, an asking price our realtor seemed almost apologetic about. She said the previous owners had left unexpectedly. She mentioned the county had designated the property as historically significant. We did not ask what that meant. We just signed the papers and started packing. We should have asked what it meant. The farmhouse sits at the end of a dirt lane that forks off the county road and simply stops, as if the land ran out of reasons to continue. 2 stories, white clapboard, gone to gray, a front porch that lists slightly to the left. There are old maples along the south side, and in March, without their leaves, they looked like they were reaching towards something just beyond their reach. My wife said the light was beautiful. She meant the way it came through the bare branches. I remember thinking the shadows were long for the time of day. The first 2 weeks were completely ordinary. That is the most unsettling thing about the beginning of this. There was nothing to flag. We unpacked, argued about furniture placement. The kids quarreled over bedrooms. The house smelled like old wood and something mineral, cold stone, which we assumed was the cellar venting through the floors. The cellar door is set into the kitchen floor, a heavy wooden panel on old iron hinges. The first time I opened it and looked down into the dark, I closed it again almost immediately. I told myself the smell bothered me. That was the first lie I told myself in this house. My daughter chose the smallest bedroom, the one at the northwest corner of the 2nd floor, looking out over the back field. I asked her why she wanted it when her brother had already claimed the larger room. She said the small room had a good wall. On the 5th day in the house, I walked past her door and heard it for the first time. Knock, silence, knock, knock, silence, knock. She was standing at the north wall with her back to me, one arm slightly raised between each set of sounds, perfectly still, as if she were listening for something that lived in the gaps between the beats. I asked her what she was doing. She said, playing. I asked what game, and she thought about it the way children do when deciding whether an answer is worth the effort, and then she said she was having a conversation. I laughed. My wife laughed when I told her at dinner. We invented explanations the way parents do. She had seen it on a show, she was testing the acoustics. It was a phase. We let it go. Children do strange things with corners and walls. There was nothing yet that made this seem like more than that. But I began to notice that it was always the same wall. Not just the same room, the same spot on that wall, about 2 feet from the northwest corner, at shoulder height for a 7-year-old. And it was every day, morning sometimes, after school, occasionally at night when she was supposed to be in bed. I would hear it from down the hall. Knock, pause, knock, knock, pause, knock. The sequence never changed. She never explored another part of the wall, never moved to the floor or the corner or any other room. That degree of consistency is not something children invent as play. It is something they learn. I told myself I was going to the cellar to check the insulation. That was the story I gave my own mind to get through the kitchen door and down the stairs. The cellar is low-ceilinged and stone-walled and cold even in April. A single bare bulb on a pull chain throws more shadow than light. The smell hits harder down there, mineral and cold, and something else beneath it, something that made the back of my throat tighten the way it does before nausea. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the north wall, directly below Lily's room. The north wall is different from the other three. The other walls are fieldstone set in old mortar, uneven but consistent. The north wall has a section about 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall where the stonework changes. The mortar is lighter, a noticeably different gray. The stones are set in a slightly different pattern. You would walk right past it without noticing unless something made you stop. Nothing had made me stop before, but I stood in front of that section for a long time with my hand held just short of the surface. Not quite touching it, not quite willing to. That night I searched the address, then the township, then the county history. I found genealogy forums, a Heritage Society page, a list of names that meant nothing to me. Then, without really deciding to, I typed a single word into the search bar, Hydesville. It was printed in small letters on our deed, and something in the back of my mind had been snagging on it since we signed. The results came up. I remember the room going very quiet around me, not because the house was silent, but because for the first time since we moved in, I had stopped listening to it. Hydesville, 1848. A family named Fox rented a farmhouse in this township in December of 1847. A mother, a father, 2 daughters, Margaretta and Kate, 15 and 12 years old. Within weeks, they reported strange sounds, rappings and knockings inside the walls and floors with no visible source. By late winter, the knockings had become a nightly event. Then, in March of 1848, one of the daughters, Kate, addressed the sound directly. Out loud, in the dark, she said, "Here, Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do," and she clapped her hands. And the knocking answered, clap for clap, from inside the wall. What followed was witnessed by the girl's mother and by neighbors who crowded into the house over the following days. The spirit communicated through a simple code. 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no. The mother asked it to knock out the ages of her children. It did, correctly, everyone. She asked, "Are you a human being?" Silence. "Are you a spirit?" 1 knock. "Have you been murdered?" 1 knock. "Did you die in this house?" 1 knock. The room was full of witnesses. The answers were consistent across multiple sessions. The knocking was patient and methodical, and it did not tire. Through sessions over several days, the code spelled out a story. A traveling peddler killed in the house, his body hidden on the property. Investigators came and dug in the cellar floor. At several feet down, they struck a plank set deliberately into the earth. Beneath it, hair, bones, and pressed into the cavity behind a section of relaid stone wall, a tin box sealed. The remains were removed. The account was published across the state. The Fox sisters became famous overnight, but the house was still there, the wall was still there, and the cellar remained long after the fame had faded. I sat with that for a long time. 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no. My daughter had been knocking. One knock, pause, two knocks, pause, one knock, yes, no, yes. I had heard it as a rhythm, as a game. I had never once assigned it meaning. But sitting in that kitchen with the cellar door 3 feet away and Lily asleep above me, I understood for the first time that it wasn't a rhythm at all. It was a sentence. She was asking something through that specific wall in the specific language that had been used in this house before any of us were born. I went upstairs. Lily was on her bed, a book open in her lap, not reading it. I sat beside her and kept my voice even and asked her where she had learned to knock like that. She gave me the look children use when they think an adult is being deliberately slow. She said she hadn't learned it anywhere. She said the wall taught her. I asked what she meant. She said that on the first night she slept in this room, she woke up and heard something tapping from inside the wall. And she had been tapping back every day since. That night, I lay awake and listened to the house. I know its sounds by now. The specific creak of certain floorboards, the tick of the pipes. What I heard at 2 a.m. was none of that. It came from the northwest corner, low and rhythmic and deliberate. I got up, went to Lily's door, put my hand flat against it. She was asleep, just breathing, nothing coming from her room. The sound was below me. I followed it downstairs, through the kitchen, and stood over the cellar door, counting through the boards. 1 knock, 2 knocks, 1 knock. Silence. Then again, it was completely indifferent to my presence. I went down. I told myself I would find a pipe, an animal, anything with a name and a shape. The smell at the bottom of the stairs was worse than before. I pulled the light on. The cellar looked exactly as I had left it. But the room felt inhabited in the way a room feels when someone has been in it without you. Nothing moved, nothing changed, just something different in the quality of the air. I stood in front of the altered section of the north wall and listened. The sound was coming from directly behind it, close enough that I could feel the vibration through my feet. It knocked once from inside the stone, right in front of me. Solid, distinct, not faint or ambiguous. Then twice, then once. I made a sound I cannot describe and pressed my back against the south wall and stood there counting my own breathing. After 30 seconds of silence, it knocked again, the same sequence, and then after it, 3 additional knocks, then a 4th, as if the count was extending itself, as if something had been keeping a running tally in the dark beneath this house for a very long time and had been waiting for someone to come close enough to hear how high the number had gone. The next morning, I drove to the County Historical Society. The woman at the desk recognized the address without me giving her the full number. She said the property came up more often than you might expect. She pulled an archival folder and slid it across without comment. Witness statements from 1848, handwritten, old. There was a detail in those accounts I had not found in any online summary. When the investigators removed the relayed stones from the cellar wall in 1848, the knocking began again from inside. 1 knock per stone removed, as if something in the cavity was counting each one as it came down, as if it had never stopped counting. When I got back, Lily was at the wall. I stood in the doorway and watched without speaking. The sequence was longer now, the familiar 3 beats, and then 5 or 6 additional knocks at the end, slow and deliberate. She paused. She tilted her head, and the wall answered her. I watched it happen. I was 4 feet away and fully awake. The sequence she had knocked came back through the stone, beat for beat, and she nodded. Then she said without turning around, "I know you're there." She was facing the wall. I do not believe she was talking to me. I crossed the room and turned her gently around and crouched to her level. I asked her, in the steadiest voice I could manage, "What are you listening for?" She thought about it the way she does when she already has the answer and is deciding how to say it. She said the man inside the wall had been counting something for a very long time, and that he needed someone to know the number. I asked what the number was. She looked past me toward the wall, her eyes moving the way eyes move when they are following something only they can track. Then she looked back at me, and she said, "He's still counting." I don't know what is in that wall. The historical record says the remains found in 1848 were removed and given a burial. I have no way of knowing whether everything was accounted for. What I know is that the knocking has not stopped, that Lily goes to that wall every morning and every evening and conducts her patient, careful conversation, and that something answers her, that the sequence grows longer each week. Whatever is keeping that count in the dark beneath this house has been keeping it since before any of us were alive. If that thought is going to follow you home tonight, then subscribe. There is more of this to come.
I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like something I invented. I didn't. This happened to me 11 days ago. On a Tuesday overnight, I almost didn't take. At a building I am never going back inside. I've spent 2 weeks looking for an explanation. Something that fits inside the world I know. And I keep ending up in the same place. The only answer I have left is the one I've been afraid to say out loud. So I'm going to say it here to you, and then you can decide what you believe. There's always a moment in a story like this where someone makes a choice they can't take back. They open the door, they go down the stairs, they pick up the phone. I picked up the phone more than once. I want you to understand that I did it because I thought I was doing my job, that it was a glitch, a misfired signal, someone's idea of a prank. I want you to know every reason I had for not being afraid, because those reasons are the only thing that makes what actually happened impossible to explain. I took the overnight filing position at the county medical examiner's office because that was the only job I could find that didn't require a car. A medical examiner's office is a morgue. I need you to hold on to that because it matters later. The newly dead coming around the clock. Car accidents, overdoses. The people who die alone and aren't found for a while. Someone has to open a file for every one of them. The posting said no prior experience necessary, just comfort with administrative tasks and a calm disposition in a clinical environment. That should have been my first warning, but the pay was good. The hours were 11 to 7, and I told myself it was just paperwork. Intake forms, case numbers, chain of custody logs. A folder started for everybody that came through the doors that night. Filing. I told myself it was the same as any other office job. I told myself that a lot. My supervisor gave me the orientation in under 20 minutes. She had the manner of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything. Efficient, clipped, nothing wasted. The filing room was on the second floor, a long, narrow space with fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. Metal shelving ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, dense with labeled folders and binders. The 4th wall had a window that looked out over the parking lot, and beyond it, the loading dock, where the intake vans came and went. She walked me through the log system, the color-coded folders, the sign-in protocol. Then she pointed at the phone. It was an analog multi-line unit. the kind you'd see in an office from the late 80s. Square rubber buttons along the bottom, a cracked plastic handset, a small digital display showing dashes where numbers should be. She told me it was wired into the building internal system, which ran on a separate loop from the modern lines. Most extensions, she said, were legacy, or desk lines from before the renovation, some of them running down to the level below, where the bodies were kept in refrigerated storage. If it rang, it was probably a wrong number. Someone downstairs hitting the wrong button. She said I could ignore it. She said it like it barely mattered, and then she left. The first 3 hours were exactly as quiet as you'd expect. I worked through a backlog of intake folders, matched case numbers to log entries, filed everything in the right place. The building had a particular quality of silence, not peaceful, but pressurized, like the quiet in a room after someone has stopped speaking and no one is sure they're done. Around 2 a.m, the heating system kicked on, and the rush of air through the vents made me flinch hard enough to knock a stack of folders off the shelf. I laughed at myself, picked them up, sat back down. Then the phone rang. I picked it up on the second ring. The display showed 4 digits beginning with a 0. I said hello. There was nothing on the other end, not dead air, but a presence to the silence, a quality different from an open, empty line. And then, just as I was pulling the handset away from my ear, I heard it. One long exhale, wet and low and close to the receiver, like whatever was producing it had its mouth pressed right against the mouthpiece. Slow, patient, gone. The line didn't click off, it just became silence again. I held the handset for a long time before I set it down. I told myself it was a prank, a hazing thing, new hire, night shift, spooky building, someone's idea of funny. But I couldn't stop looking at the number on my display. I wrote it on a sticky note almost without deciding to. The way you do when some part of you has decided something matters before the rest of you has agreed. Then I opened the intake log and found the extension reference sheet clipped inside the front cover. 2 columns, staff extensions on the left, facility extensions on the right. I ran my eye down the right column until I found the number I'd written down. It wasn't a staff desk. It wasn't an office or a break room. The sheet listed it as Bay 4. Cold storage, one of the refrigerated drawers downstairs where the bodies waited. I read it 3 times. Then I pulled the night's intake paperwork, the forms my supervisor had handed me at the start of the shift, and I found Bay 4 on the 3rd page. 1 intake. An intake here means one thing: a dead body, tagged and logged and sealed into the drawer. Logged at 9:47 p.m., 2 hours before I'd clocked in. A case number, a body weight, condition notes in tight clinical shorthand. A dead person in cold storage 1 floor below me, and the drawer they were sealed inside had just called me. I spent 20 minutes building rational explanations. Old wiring, a faulty relay, completing a connection and generating line noise that could, if you were already listening for something, resolve into a sound like a breath. I had almost convinced myself when the phone rang again. Same extension. I stared at it through 4 full rings, then picked up. The same full silence, inhabited, present. And then the exhale came, longer this time, like something with a great deal of air inside it, slowly and patiently letting it go. And at the very end, before the line softened back into quiet, I heard something else. The faint beginning of what might have been a word. I kept working. That's what you do when you don't know what else to do. you do the task in front of you. I pulled the full reference sheet and went through the intake log page by page, cross-checking every bay with an active intake against the calls I'd received. Bay 4, confirmed intake. 2 calls received from that extension. That was when I noticed a column on the far right of the sheet I'd overlooked, narrow, nearly swallowed by the binding crease. 3 words printed at the top, assigned capacity. I looked at Bay 4's row. The number in that column was 1. 1 bay, 1 capacity, 1 body. I know I should have called someone right then. My supervisor's cell number was on a card pinned to the corkboard directly above the desk. I looked at it, and then the phone rang again. Same extension on the display. And the part of my brain still insisting on a rational explanation needed one more point of data. I needed to hear it again to be certain I wasn't imagining the whole thing. So I picked up. The silence was immediate and total. No exhale this time. Instead, something I can only describe as a held breath. An anticipation, as though something on the other end was waiting for me to speak first. And then it came. Not an exhale this time, 2 sounds in sequence, separated by a pause long enough to feel entirely deliberate. First, the familiar low, wet release of air. Then, beneath it, a dense, settling compression. The specific sound of something shifting weight against a firm surface. And then, at a slight distance from the receiver, came a sound my brain refused to process as what it clearly was. Metal moving slowly against metal. A long, deep, grinding slide. The sound of a heavy track-mounted drawer. The kind built to bear significant weight. Built to be opened and sealed from the outside. Rolling open from the inside. I set the phone down with both hands because one wasn't steady enough. I sat still for a long time. The heating vent pushed slow, warm air across the back of my neck. I cannot tell you how much I hated the word breath in that moment. And the fluorescence burst, and the parking lot beyond the window was flat and orange on the sodium light. And I thought, Bay 4 is directly below this room, 1 floor down. I knew that from the intake forms I'd been filing all night. I had a clear and specific mental image of exactly where Bay 4 was in relation to where I was sitting. Directly below, 1 floor down. I didn't go down. I want to be clear. I am not the person in the film who walks toward the thing in the dark. I stayed in my chair. I picked up my supervisor's card and dialed her cell. 5 rings, then voicemail. I called the security desk, the guard whose name I still didn't know, and got no answer there either. I left a message that I'm certain sounded completely unhinged. Something about the phone system, wrong extensions, bad wiring. Please can someone come upstairs? Then I sat with both hands flat on the desk and waited. The beating was very quiet. While I was waiting, the phone rang. A different extension this time. I found it on the reference sheet without hesitating. Bay 7. The intake log confirmed it. 1 active intake, logged at 6:12 p.m. I didn't pick up. I counted 11 rings before it stopped. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then, Bay 3. 1 active intake. I didn't answer. I watched the display cycle through extension after extension, each one a number I now knew by heart, each one a bay I had filed intake paperwork for, and I counted the rings. And I did not pick up, and eventually each one stopped. There were 6 active intakes in the facility that night. I had filed all 6 of their forms, held every one of those pages, matched their case numbers, noted their bay assignments. Sitting at that desk at 3:42 in the morning, I counted the calls I'd received against the bay reference sheets and understood that every active intake bay had called. Every single one. 6 bays, 6 calls. On bay 4, assigned capacity 1, one body, are called 3 times. 3 calls from one extension assigned to one bay, assigned to one person. The math implied something I was not yet ready to do the math on. The security guard came upstairs at 4:15. I heard his footsteps on the stairs before the door opened. Solid and deliberate. The sound of someone who was not afraid because he hadn't been told to be yet. I showed him the sticky notes. I showed him the assigned capacity column. I showed him my list of calls matched against the intake log. He looked at everything with the careful patience of a man who thought he was probably humoring someone who had spooked themselves. He said he'd go down, check the lower level, make sure the bay hardware was all properly sealed. He said it like it was routine. He was gone for 11 minutes. When he came back, he didn't sit down. He stood in the doorway and said, "Bay 4 is empty." Not empty as in a misfiled form. Empty as in the bay drawer was open and the tray was bare. There was no intake in Bay 4. There had been one, logged at 9:47 p.m., a form I had filed myself, right there in the open folder on the desk in front of us. The guard called the duty supervisor. The supervisor called the on-call investigator. The next 40 minutes were controlled and professional and quietly frantic. And they did not find anything. Not that night. I gave a formal statement before I left. I was told not to discuss it externally. Advice I'm clearly no longer following. Because on my way out that morning, I passed the corkboard above the desk and something stopped me. The sticky note I'd written Bay 4's extension on had been pinned to the board. I had left it flat on the desk surface. Now it was pinned up, and beside it in handwriting I didn't recognize and couldn't place, someone had written a sequence of additional digits. Not an extension from the reference sheet, not a number I could match to anything in that building. I photographed it before I walked outside. I have not called it. I don't think I will. What I keep returning to is the arithmetic. Assigned capacity 1. Bay 4 called 3 times. If the first 2 calls were from the intake, logged at 9:47, and if the third call was from something else, something that had been waiting in a sealed refrigerated drawer in the dark. By the time the guard went down and found the tray empty and the door already open, then whatever made that third call had arrived in Bay 4 without being logged, and it had been trying to reach me. If that thought stays with you the way it stays with me, you should subscribe. I have a feeling this isn't over yet, and I don't want to be the only one keeping count.
There are things you cannot unknow once you have seen them. I have had 20 years to make peace with that, and I will tell you that the peace is real, partial and slow, but real. It does not erase the shape of what I saw. What I am about to tell you happened in October of 2001 in my apartment on Rector Street in Lower Manhattan, 8 blocks from where the World Trade Center had stood. This is not a ghost story. It is not exaggerated. Debris from the towers, and more than debris, was recovered from apartments, rooftops, and streets across the surrounding neighborhood for months afterward. That is in the public record. I was one of the people who found something. I need you to know that before I begin. Stay with me through the ordinary parts, because they matter. The ordinary parts are what make the rest of it real. I was 22 years old. I had moved to the city about 14 months earlier, and I was still in that first apartment phase where even a leaky faucet feels like an event. Rector Street, studio apartment, 4th floor, a futon I had hauled up the stairs myself, a coffee maker with a cracked carafe I kept meaning to replace. I would leave a half-drunk mug on the table most mornings because I was always almost late for something. I was 22 and I was happy. genuinely, quietly happy. And I had no way of knowing that in less than a month I would be someone I barely recognized. September 11th was a Tuesday, and the sky that morning was that particular fall blue, clear and high and very sharp, the kind of sky that makes New York feel like a gift. I was still in pajamas at 8:45, standing at my window with coffee. The first thing I registered as wrong was sound, a low, tearing roar that I felt in my chest before I understood it as sound at all. Then the glass in the building across the street seemed to shudder. I looked north. An enormous column of dark smoke was climbing into all that blue from the North Tower. I stood completely still for a moment, unable to make what I was seeing fit inside anything I had ever known. By the time the second plane hit, I was half-dressed, jeans in one shoe and the other in my hand, when the second impact came through the walls, the building itself flinching. My neighbor from down the hall was in the stairwell saying, we have to go," in this very quiet and very steady voice. I left the mug on the table. I left the lights on. I left the door unlocked because I thought I was stepping out for an hour. I did not take my passport. I did not take the photographs on my desk. I took my keys out of habit, walked down 4 flights, and stepped out into the street without looking back up at my floor. I did not go back for 37 days. I walked north up Broadway with hundreds of others, and by the time I reached Canal Street, both towers had fallen. I know that now, though I did not register it as distinct from everything else I was failing to absorb. I ended up at a friend's apartment in the West Village, and then with my parents upstate, and then back in the city, existing in a kind of suspended present. In those weeks, I began to understand, from news reports and from people who had been closer, what a debris field of that scale actually meant. What happens when that much material collapses from that height in a dense neighborhood? What spreads outward? What travels? What comes to rest in places no one expected? In mid-October, a notice reached me, by phone first, then by a letter, forwarded to my parents' address. Residents of certain blocks south of Chambers Street were being permitted brief supervised returns to collect essential documents and medications. You would be accompanied by a National Guard escort. You would have a limited amount of time. I called the number, gave my name, and 3 days later I was on a train heading back into the city for the first time since I had walked away from my unlocked door. I kept telling myself I was going for the passport, for the photographs, practical things. I kept not asking myself the other question, why I needed to see it with my own eyes, because I was not ready to answer it. The soldier who met me at the building entrance was young, younger than me, I think, or maybe just young in the way that composure can make a person seem ageless. He was quiet and professional, and he had that particular form of kindness that asks nothing back from you. He told me I had 20 minutes. We went up the 4 flights because the elevator wasn't running, and in the stairwell, the smell reached me, thick and mineral, and unlike anything I had a word for, something that settled at the back of the throat and did not leave. I had to stop on the second landing and breathe through my mouth before I could keep climbing. The door to my apartment was how I had left it, unlocked, slightly ajar, as though I really had only stepped out for an hour. I pushed it open, and the light was wrong immediately. Too much of it from the wrong direction. The back of the apartment was bright where it should have been dim, and after a moment I understood that the window in the back room had been breached. Dust covered every surface, gray and fine and deep, settled the way ash settles over a long time, not like something recent, but something geological. And papers I did not recognize lay scattered across the floor. Pages from offices I had never been in, carried through the broken window on the morning of the 11th. I stood in the main room longer than I should have, just taking it in. The apartment was still recognizably mine. Same furniture, same arrangement, the same small domestic geography I had lived inside for 14 months, but all of it made foreign by the gray. My coffee mug was still on the table, under its coat of dust, exactly where I had left it 37 days before. The thought that came, not grief yet, not horror, just a flat and strange recognition, was that the air settling into every surface of this room had passed through something I could not look at directly and name. The soldier had stayed in the hallway, giving me space. I would be grateful for that later. I was not grateful yet. I crossed the main room toward the back. The passport was in the desk drawer in the room I used as a home office, the far end of the apartment, sectioned off with a bookshelf and a standing lamp. The door to that room was closed. I must have pulled it shut on my way out that morning without thinking. The automatic gesture of someone who expected to come back. The gap underneath the door glowed, brighter than the rest of the apartment, more direct, which I told myself was October light through the broken window. I put my hand on the handle. The metal was gritty with settled ash. I turned it. The door swung inward, and the hallway light moved ahead of me into the room. The window frame was still there, but the glass was gone, and cold October air moved through the opening. The dust on this floor had been disturbed, less even, more unsettled, redistributed as though air had moved through here with considerable force. I was 2 steps in when I saw it. I want to be precise because precision is the only honest thing I have left to offer about that moment. I did not have a second of not understanding. There was no gradual assembly of information. I looked and I knew, fully and completely, before I had any power to stop myself from knowing. I know what an airplane seat looks like. Everyone does. The shape of the headrest, the particular angle of a recline, the specific stillness of something designed for motion that is now completely, permanently still. My mind completed the picture before I had any say in it. I will not give you detail beyond what I'm about to say, not because I do not remember, but because some things belong only to the people they happen to, and I am not the one they happen to. What I will tell you is this: it was a passenger cabin seat, and it had come through the window and come to rest against the far wall of my home office. And it was not empty. I made a sound I had never made before and have not made since. Not a scream exactly, lower than that, less controlled, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere beneath language and before thought. I stumbled back into the doorframe. I could not look away and I could not keep looking, and for several seconds I was suspended between those two things at once. And then I heard boots on the floor of the main room, quick, heavy, purposeful. The soldier was there. He said my name. I still do not know how he had it ready, but he said it clearly, and the sound of my own name in that room was the first thing I had heard that I could hold on to. He did not look past me into the room, or if he did, he managed it without letting me see him do it, without making it something I would have to witness him experiencing too. He stepped deliberately into the space between me and the open door, put a firm and steady hand on my shoulder and said, "Come on, we're going, let's go." The quietest possible voice, nothing in it but direction. And he turned me around. I'm still grateful for the care in that gesture, the physical deliberateness of reorienting someone away from what they should not have to keep seeing. We went down the stairs. I held the handrail the whole way. Neither of us said a word. Outside, the air was cold and gray, and I sat down on the front step of the building. I did not have my passport. I had not opened the desk drawer. I never went back for it. I renewed it years later at a federal office in Brooklyn, sitting in a plastic chair under fluorescent light, and when the clerk asked if I was all right, I said yes, just tired. I gave up the apartment lease 3 weeks after the visit. My landlord waived the breaking fee without discussion. I think he already knew. I moved to a sublet in Carroll Gardens and then to a proper apartment in Cobble Hill, and I rebuilt the routines one by one. The coffee maker, the morning light, the small domestic structure that holds a life together. The rebuilding was real. The life it made is real. I want to be honest about that. But there are things that do not return to their original shape. They rebuild, They just rebuild with a seam in them, a place where the repair is visible if you know to look. For me, it is chairs, not every chair, a specific combination, a headrest at a certain height, a certain angle of recline, seen from a doorway or from across a room I'm just entering. Hotels mostly, and airports, which carries its own particular cruelty. I will be walking and catch one at the edge of my vision, and something in me stops before my mind does. An older, faster system, an alarm set in October of 2001 that has never been fully cleared. I go still. I look somewhere else until it passes. It always passes. It never stops. What I found in that room has been documented. The public record, news accounts, survivor testimony, oral history projects, includes evidence of debris and, in certain cases, the dead themselves, carried outward by the force of the collapse into the streets and buildings of the surrounding neighborhood. I was not supposed to be the one who found what I found. No one is supposed to be, but in a debris field spanning blocks in a city that dense, someone always is, and all of us who became witnesses in an ordinary moment on an ordinary errand, we kept living afterward. That is not a small thing, to keep going with honesty and with care as someone who saw what they were never meant to see. That is its own quiet, daily act. I do not tell this story to frighten you. I tell it because it happened, and because the people it happened to deserve to be remembered with honesty and with care. All of them. The ones whose names are inscribed in the memorial, and the one who came to rest in my back room on Rector Street, and the young soldier who turned me around and walked me down the stairs without a word, and the 22-year-old who went up for her passport and came back down without it, and has been carrying this ever since. If you are still with me at the end of this, thank you. It helps more than I can say to not carry it alone. If you want to return to stories told this carefully, I will be here.
That's your dose of dread for tonight. Sweet dreams.